Actually wanted to ask you on this COVID-19. So I was in high school during COVID. How do you
Oh my.
think that's affected people?
I think, well, for lack of a better way to put it, I think it fucked us all up. And maybe especially, your generation and younger. Um, it affected us in so many ways. I mean, it affected us economically, it shut down economies. It affected us in not trusting government and not trusting information, we get from media and internet. It affected us that it led to a lot of loneliness and isolation, probably to a lot of marital issues where you have a couple that can't leave the house and go to work anymore,
Mm.
or their kids are out of school. And so now they got to be home around their kids full time. But and again, my model of interacting is around being a social animal. So, I've written, my books on, get out of the house, expand your route, linger in public. And all of a sudden, no, you can't leave the house. You can't expand your route. You can't linger in public. And we didn't know when that was going to end. For a long time, it just kept getting worse. And we didn't know, is it going to end? And, still there's questions, there's uncertainties, more waves of it keep coming around. Maybe, we've got enough resistance to it. I don't know. Who I think probably did the most damage to is young people,
Mm.
school age people. What I think I can speak, I think it's pretty accurate information. In general, school age kids were not at high risk. I think what the fear was, they'll become carriers and bring it home to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa,
Right.
60, 70-year-old people that are high risk. I was high risk category. I'm 68. I was high risk. I got vaccinated. I know you can debate that either way. But my belief was, even at my age, all right, isolate me, you know,
Right.
keep me in isolation and let the kids go to school because they need it. Now, I will add one other thing. I heard heartbreaking stories of older people, like in nursing homes, uh, retirement centers, where their adult children could not go visit them because it was just not allowed, and these people died in isolation. I mean, that's sad to me. That's sad.
I'm going to bring up on
But
this one as well with like the dying in isolation. It's genuinely awful. So my mom
yeah,
had surgery during COVID-19, like abrupt surgery. She was taken to the hospital overnight and she was there for 3 weeks. And during that time, she's like, you can't see me. Like, you can't see me. And she'd
yeah,
FaceTime with tears in her eyes. Like, it's like, it was 3 weeks, right? And she's just bawling. Like, she can't see the family. Like, what's going on? And she was, to be fair, she was at high risk. So like if we gave her COVID,
yeah,
she would have probably died. But
yeah.
still, like social isolation like that is just awful.
It's devastating. I know, another story. One of my wife's sisters came to watch our children while we were visiting in Seattle. And she came here kind of sick, but she was wearing a mask. And then while she was here, she got sicker. We were still up in Seattle, here meaning Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where we live, watching my two stepkids. They're 18, 16 now, so they're probably 16 and 14 at the time. Um, and so she got sicker. So my wife said, go get tested. And she tested positive for COVID. She also tested positive for dengue. And dengue fever can make you feel like you're going to die, and it can kill you too. So we got back home, and my wife said, I can't send her home back to Guadalajara. And I said, no, let her stay here. Take care of her. So she stayed in our spare room, and she kept getting worse. She kind of got better, but then got worse and got worse. And finally, my wife took her to the hospital. They admitted her, and my wife never saw her again. She died 4 or 5 days later, went into a coma and never came out of it. And my wife, she dropped her off at the hospital, and that's the last, because they wouldn't let her go in and see her once they admitted her to the hospital. My wife still grieves about that, mainly the part that she couldn't go be with her in her last minutes. So, yeah, I don't know the answers to that, but it's painful. So, but then, so you got, young generation. Statistically, kids across the board, your grades went down during COVID. Learning from
Mhm.
home doesn't work well. Depression went up. More of nowadays they do a lot of surveys with young adults, adolescents, about your self esteem, how you feel about yourself, your hopefulness, hopelessness, your experience in life, and those all those markers just dove, where people just feeling terrible about themselves and about life and about what's to come. And so I see even beyond COVID, and I've been talking about this on a lot of interviews lately, the isolation in men. So COVID kind of put on steroids the isolation that a lot of young men have, because a lot of guys grow up. You grow up with broadband internet, there's Wi-Fi everywhere you go. You can be on your cells 24/7. There's social media. There's just, everything's on the internet. You can watch podcasts on YouTube 24/7. Look at porn 24/7. And what's happened is a lot of young men have not developed social skills and beyond their technical ability to do, whatever they do on their phone or on a computer. And in statistically, men have, greater illnesses when they're isolated, greater depression, higher suicide rates, earlier death, more health problems. And it's an epidemic. And I think, unfortunately, most of it, during COVID, there was no choice.
Mhm.
But a lot of it, the young men, and it's mostly young men, but it's older men, just aren't making the choice to go be social. It's easier just to get up and get on your device and just stay on your device all day. It gives you the illusion you're doing something, the illusion maybe you have a connection with somebody.
Mhm.
But these guys don't get out in public. They're not out talking to people. They're not out socializing. They're not hanging out with their crew, with their gang, with their buddies, with the opposite sex. And I think it's taking a big toll. And so, COVID, I think, really put a bright spotlight on just how essential it is, all of us, all ages, but especially adolescents, children, adolescents, young adults need social connection. It's just, it's the lifeblood of both physical and mental health.
It is. It truly is. And it's so weird too. I know my friend group, we almost got closer in a sense because of COVID, because we all had that sense of social isolation. But before, because we were all hanging out before, we knew what it was like. So coming out of COVID, we hammered in even more and we got even closer. But I see with so many different friend groups that they just kind of splintered during COVID. Like they got worse. Maybe they had a fight online or something that really just broke everyone apart and they had no one to talk to.
Yeah.
So you got that.
Well, who do you talk to? For example, say you're in a peer group and maybe something happens that splits apart. Who do you guys talk to? Who do you go to? Do you go to your parents? Do you go to a coach, a football coach, a sports coach? Do you go to a teacher? Who do you go to kind of work stuff through?
Especially not having someone who really had anyone like that. I mean, having that friend group was essential. Like, I can't really talk to my parents. I don't really have anyone that I can talk to that's close. I moved like an hour and a half away. So having that friend group is that's what you have, right? You don't have anyone to look up to. So you need to find someone else as well. Like, you need to have a backup in a sense. Like, I don't mean to be that have a backup as in framing them as whatever, they're just kind of there. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, because I'm a big fan, and I teach people in my workshop something that I call cooperative reciprocal relationships. Mm-hmm. Meaning, they're friends, there might be professionals. You and I have a cooperative reciprocal relationship. Mm-hmm. You're getting something of value out of the time we spend together. I get something of value out of the time we spend together. It's good to have lots of those, 100 of those. It can be friends, it can be professionals, it can be groups that you're a part of, it can be practices that you practice every day, even my meditation, my daily pages, walking the dog in the park every morning. That's part of my just 100 CRRs that I've got in my life. We need those. Now, again, most of us aren't taught how to do that. We're not taught how to fill our life with those resources that reciprocally meet our needs while it meets other people's needs as well. And so I really am curious because I'm concerned about young men. My son is 39. It's hard to believe he's going to be 39 in August. It's hard to believe my son's pushing 40. He's a millennial. He's one of those guys that grew up with a nice guy dad. But I look at younger generation, whether it's Generation Z, whatever the terminology is, and in a sense, nowadays you have 20-year-old life coaches, and I'm going, what does a 20-year-old know about life? And can coach. And my thought, I just wonder, because I don't know, who do 20-year-olds turn to for help, for life advice? Because none of us are equipped to handle all the challenges and struggles of life. Do we just find it on the internet? Do we have like YouTube gurus that we follow, podcasts? Where do young guys your age go to?
I would say the internet.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, on the Chris Williamson, I'd say he's a big one. I just remember watching all of my friends over the course of 3 months follow him, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. What's going on here? But I would say, yeah, the internet. The big ones that I see seem to be Jordan Peterson, just because of 12 rules. Chris Williamson. I know in like the business sphere, like Diary of a CEO.
I love Stephen Bartlett. Yeah, I love his interviews.
Yeah,
because I'm not a big guy that watches a lot of podcasts, even though I get interviewed quite a bit. And it's funny, before I went on Chris, this is first time I went on a show. It was probably 3 or 4 months ago. The time you and I are talking, and about 3 different people said, "Robert, you need to get on Chris Williamson. You need to get on Chris Williamson. He interviewed Connor Beaton, a friend of mine, a guy I know. He interviewed this person." I go, "Okay, that name sounds familiar. I don't know why." And then I was looking at my calendar. I was already scheduled to be on his show, and I wasn't linking the name up with, because I get a lot of invites, and I just say yes and go on the show. And he and I had a good time, hit it off, and I told him, "Hey, I'm going to be in Austin, Texas in a couple months." And he goes, "Well, let me know. We'll go get dinner. We'll have barbecue." So I let him know, and he goes, "Yeah, I've got you booked to come on. We'll do an in-person interview, and then we'll go have dinner with some of his friends." And, so I've gotten to kind of follow him. Like I said, I like the Stephen Bartlett, his show as well. I listen to some, Peter Attia, and there's a few others. I'm listening more and more now. Mm-hmm. So I really like the progression. Chris is, I think, 36. He went from being a club promoter and, being a gym bro, and a lot of his programming still is about fitness and health. And I like, when I'm in my gym working out, I'm watching him interview people about fitness and health. But I love, I watched an interview with him and Tim Ferriss the other day. And, Tim Ferriss has been around for a long time. And I wrote Chris afterwards, and I said, "Chris, I loved," because my interview, my recent one, had just dropped about the same time. I watched about 20 seconds of it and go, "Okay, I look good," and I didn't want to watch the rest. And then so I saw that he'd done one with Tim Ferriss, and these guys were talking about love, about spirituality, about fiction books that they have read and highly recommend, about just mental health. And I'm going, here's 2 really intelligent, very successful guys just being real and being vulnerable and talking about the therapy that they go to. So I'm thinking if there's a generation following people, like Chris, like Stephen Bartlett, okay, maybe you're in good hands. Maybe that's the best substitute for an in-person mentor or coach that good, and that's good. I'm going to relay that to Chris, that he's a role model for a whole generation of 19 and 20-year-olds. So he'll probably get a kick out of that.
Yeah, I honestly, it's amazing because he's so authentic too. Like he makes
he's
point
real
of being like, dude, like life, like this is my life, like this is how it goes. And so it's so nice to just see another person do that, because the internet comes off as so fake way too often.
Hey guys, post-production Andrew here. I'm just cutting into the podcast here to let you know I do have a newsletter in addition to the podcast. This is not just the only thing I do. The newsletter is just a 3-2-1 style. It's for digital marketing. So if you're interested at all in that, you'll get 3 weekly insights or 3 weekly tips. You'll get 2 news, so what's kind of going on in the industry, what's going on, new CMOs, etc. And you'll get 1 of my client case studies, kind of what we did for them, how we helped them out. So if that is at all something you're interested in, feel free to subscribe to the newsletter. The link to that is tuckercmdigital.com/newsletter. So link will also be in the description. Feel free to check that out. And back to the podcast.